Good morning, everybody. I don't know how there could have been any confusion about where we were going to set up because I brought the Michigan weather with me here today. So it's a really beautiful morning here in D.C., very temperate. I want to thank you all for taking time to be with us today to mark the introduction of the Two-State Solution Act. A couple of years ago, in the fall of 2019, I took a trip to Israel and Palestine, which was my second trip to the region, but my first as a member of Congress. And I went thinking, honestly, that a two-state solution might no longer be possible. Maybe the so-called facts on the ground meant that there was no way to make it feasible. I was really skeptical. I went with some of the people who are here with me today. Louder? Okay. And then I went and we had so many meetings and site visits and conversations with Israelis and with Palestinians. And I was relieved to conclude that I was wrong. A two-state solution is still totally possible. We can have a two-state solution that secures Israel's future as a democratic state and a national home for the Jewish people, alongside a viable democratic Palestinian state. Now, it's really easy for us as members of Congress and for other people to say that we support a two-state solution. Everyone says that without having necessarily any content to it or any action that follows it. It's like people say after every mass shooting that their thoughts, our prayers are with the victim, and nothing happens to change the situation with gun control in this country. The hard part is actually doing something to make a two-state solution a reality. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, the conditions aren't right for negotiations, or that X, Y, and Z needs to happen first. But here's the thing. Nothing is just going to happen overnight. It's going to take work. It's going to take us, the United States of America, changing our policies in a way that accelerates progress and discourages steps that hinder progress. That's why we're here today introducing the Two-State Solution Act. This bill does a number of things. It clarifies the distinction between Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories and reverses policies put in place by the Trump administration that removed those distinctions. It funds programming in the occupied territories to promote human rights, democracy, the rule of law, and to strengthen civil society organizations, because a Palestinian government that respects civil and human rights and enjoys legitimacy among the Palestinian people is both necessary in its own right and important for productive negotiations for a two-state solution. Our bill encourages diplomacy on both a governmental level and a people-to-people level, providing a way to reopen the PLO foreign mission here in Washington and authorizing funding for shared educational opportunities, youth activities, business-to-business activities among Israelis and Palestinians. Finally, the bill makes clear that assistance to help Israel address its very real security challenges should continue without $1 less, but it cannot be used in a manner that violates internationally recognized human rights or for activities that perpetuate the occupation or enable de facto or heaven knows de jure annexation. That includes activities like expanding settlements, demolishing homes in Palestinian communities, or evicting Palestinians from their homes. Congress has long delineated explicitly what taxpayer dollars can and cannot be used for, domestically and internationally, including the assistance provided to Israel. This is nothing new. It is, however, essential if we're serious about achieving a two-state solution and upholding the human rights of Israelis and Palestinians alike. During the Trump administration, Israel accelerated planned settlements by more than 154% as compared to the prior administration. If we're serious about a foreign policy that respects human rights, if we're serious about supporting two states for two peoples, then we can't waste more time. We've got to retake the position of the United States as both Israel's best friend and an honest broker that brings these two parties together, these cousins, Jews and Palestinians, Israelis and Palestinians together to come up with a settlement that so both Israel and Palestine can live together in peace. Today, with these brave colleagues, I say the time for action and restored American leadership has arrived. It's right now, and I couldn't be prouder to be doing this with these great friends. So we're going to hear from some of the, 24 people who are already co-sponsoring this bill as original co-sponsors. And the first two people we're going to hear from are the people who led the trip to Israel I went on. First, my sister, Jan Schakowsky of Illinois. Jan?
Andy, I want to thank you so much for your leadership on this, and I'm so proud to stand with you to introduce the Two-State Solution Act. It is not only possible to get an agreement, but it is also absolutely necessary if we believe in the security of Israel and we believe in justice for the Palestinians. With this legislation, it is our intent to go beyond just the words two-state solution. And it is time for the United States to enact policies that actually work to make this a reality. And this legislation is a really, really important step forward. We make clear that no U.S. funding may be used by Israel to annex more Palestinian territory or to violate human rights. But we also authorize urgently needed funds for civil society and human rights organizations and the work that we're doing to have democracy in Palestine. And this bill would finally differentiate the state of Israel and the territories that it occupies in U.S. law and denounce Israel's settlement expansion, the demolition of Palestinian homes, and the forced evictions that we have witnessed. It has become clear that let me get that. It has become more and more clear every day that really only a two-state solution is going to be the way forward for Israel to remain a secure, Jewish, democratic state and to ensure Palestinians can achieve justice, peace, and self-determination. So I am really proud to be able to work with my colleagues that are here today, with the advocates who have been working so hard, and I believe that we can get a majority to pass this legislation. Thank you.
All right. And now the gentleman from Vermont and a leader on this issue for so long, the great Peter Welch. Peter?
There's a reason that so many Israelis and so many of us support a two-state solution. It's because Israel wants to continue to be a vibrant democracy, and Israel wants to continue to be a Jewish state. And it is a state that also has a rising Arab population. And those Israelis who believe in democracy know that if you want to maintain that extraordinary state of Israel that's democratic and Jewish, it has to have an opportunity for the aspirations of the Palestinian neighbors in and outside of Israel proper to have their own chance at building their own future. It's about democratic aspirations that we all share, Palestinians and Israelis. And it's about a recognition that we can have peace and democracy and solve this intractable problem that has caused so much suffering for so many people. Since I've been in Congress, there's been an ebb and flow, but mostly an ebb, about the energy behind maintaining our commitment to working towards a two-state solution. And what this legislation is an effort to do is reinvigorate our commitment to that two-state solution. We reaffirm our support for the security of Israel as a democratic Jewish state, and we reaffirm our confidence that if we work together, we can have a Palestinian state that will coexist in peace with its Israeli neighbors. That has to be the future. Thank you.
Right.
Right.
Now, you want to talk about an authority about the two-state solution. We have the author of HRES 326, which is really the latest moment when we really unified this Congress on a bipartisan basis to support the two-state solution. And just a real expert on this issue, Alan Lowenthal from California. Alan?
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. And as Representative Levin said, my name is Alan Lowenthal. I'm from the California's 47th Congressional District. And I'm standing here as a Jewish progressive and a lover of Israel. Last Congress, as was just pointed out, I fought to pass House Resolution 326 to lay down a marker against annexation and against Donald Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu's efforts to erode the possibilities of a two-state solution. Today, I am so proud to support the two-state solution bill that all of us support, that has been led and that is being led by Congressman Andy Levin. A great deal has changed for the better since that critical time when we introduced 326, but I still see too many people, even passionate supporters of peace, willing to put the search for a two-state solution on the back burner. This is deeply misguided. Peace without a lasting and just solution to the conflict is an illusion. It is not sustainable. No matter how difficult the road ahead may seem, only, and I repeat that, only a Palestinian state can guarantee dignity and justice to the Palestinian people without the burdens of occupation. Only, and I repeat that again, only a two-state solution can preserve Israel as a free, secure, and democratic state to serve as a national home for the Jewish people. We are here today to make sure that our foreign policy and our aid serves the mutual interests of the United States, the State of Israel, and the Palestinian people. This bill will enshrine in federal law, and I repeat that, in federal law, that the United States will not pay the costs of annexation or permanent occupation. Building the foundations of a viable Palestinian state will require difficult choices for all parties. But most of all, it will require American leadership. The Two-State Solutions Act will put us on that path once again, and I thank my friend and colleague, Andy Levin, for his bold leadership.
Thank you so much, Alan. I want to point out that we have Jewish and non-Jewish members amongst our original co-sponsors, members of the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Foreign Affairs Committee. And next, I want to introduce a rising star on the Foreign Affairs Committee, a sister Jewish and member of the Foreign Affairs Committee like me, the gentlewoman from Southern California, Sarah Jacobs.
Well, thank you so much, Andy, for leading this effort, and thanks to Jeremy Ben-Ami and Hadar Susskind and all my colleagues for being here with us today. As many of you know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is deeply personal to me. As a Jewish woman with close family living in Israel and close family friends in Gaza, and as someone who has spent the better part of my adult life working on conflict prevention and resolution around the world. So I am incredibly proud to be an original co-sponsor of this historic bill and to stand here today. Because it's very clear that the status quo is not working. And it hasn't been working for a long time. The Trump administration and the Netanyahu administration's counterproductive and one-sided policies made a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict even less likely than it was before. But that can change. We have an opportunity right now, but the window is quickly closing. It is up to us to ensure that our actions are matching our rhetoric, that if we say the policy of the United States is a two-state solution, as it has been on a bipartisan basis for decades, that our actions are actually moving us closer to that goal, not further away. This summer, I joined a congressional delegation to the Middle East to identify what Congress can do to move the region closer to peace. We met with the new Israeli government, we met with the Palestinian Authority, we met with civil society organizations and groups on the ground, and we strongly reaffirmed the United States' commitment to a two-state solution and to lasting peace, security, autonomy, and dignity for both the Israeli and Palestinian people. Now with this bill, we can further cement that commitment and make clear that the United States government stands on the side of peace, justice, and dignity for all people. Because we don't have to settle for an increasingly bleak future. We are at a critical moment. This may be our last chance, and we cannot let it pass. I'm proud to be here with you all today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. We also wanted you to hear from some of the organizations that are supporting this Two-State Solution Act and that have really been in wonderful dialogue with us about it. First, I want to introduce the leader of the organization that has really done the most, I think, to stand up for the principle that you could be pro-Israel and pro-peace, that you could be pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, that the only way to have a secure and democratic future for Israel is to have full political and human rights for Palestinians with a state of their own next door. The person who organized the trip that Jan and Peter led, that I took in my first year in Congress, the founder of J Street, Jeremy Ben-Ami. Jeremy?
Thanks so much, Andy, and thank you to all the other members who are here and to the couple dozen who are original co-sponsors. I want to say this is the single most comprehensive and powerful piece of legislation that has ever been introduced into the United States Congress to support the two-state solution and reorient American foreign policy in support of that goal. And so I am so deeply grateful for all the work, laying the groundwork with 326 and Alan Lowenthal's great leadership, and all the work that Jan Schakowsky and Peter Welch have done over the years, and now Sarah Jacobs is here to support. It has built momentum to this moment when this bill comes together and says, what can we do to take our commitment to two states beyond lip service and beyond rhetoric and actually orient American policy in the right direction? That is a set of policies supported by the majority of Jewish Americans. It is supported by the majority of Americans who are pro-Israel. These are pro-Israel positions, and this bill is the single most important bill for pro-Israel Americans to get behind. And so I'm very proud that J Street is going to put all of its effort, all of its weight behind this bill to try to move it forward as far as we can in this Congress and to make sure that these policies that it represents become the policies of the United States. I want to add one word in addition on funding. One of the most important things that this bill says is that the assistance, the valuable and significant assistance that the United States provides to the state of Israel is a commitment of the United States Congress and of the United States of America. But it must be used for the purpose of advancing Israel's security. It must not be used for the purpose of deepening occupation and furthering creeping annexation. That is an exceedingly important point. It's one that's going to be discussed in the context of funding bills that are being considered even today. And America's assistance must be only and purely for the security of the state of Israel. So with that, I want to thank again all of the co-sponsors and thank Andy Levin in particular for his tremendous leadership.
Thank you, Jeremy. You know, Israel making peace with Egypt and returning the Sinai made Israel more secure. Israel making peace with Jordan made Israel more secure. The occupation's 54 years old, and real security and peace and tranquility for Israel has not been advanced by the occupation. So I really appreciate your point there. Now, another leader of one of our great organizations, one that has been on the forefront of achieving just peace for Israel and Palestine for many years, the CEO of Americans for Peace Now, Hadar Susskind.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Thank you again to all the members who are here and to Jeremy as well. The two-state solution for Israel-Palestinian conflict has sadly become one of the many causes that people love to say they support, but then do little or nothing to actively advance. Worse, many use their stated endorsement of the two-state solution as an excuse to sit idly or even support policies that hinder it. Meanwhile, the goal of an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement that is based on the creation of a viable Palestinian state living in peace and security alongside Israel is increasingly distant. Nowhere has this dynamic been more evident than here on Capitol Hill, where there's no shortage of occupation deniers and, unfortunately on both sides of the aisle, an even larger lip service caucus. Members of Congress who mouth support for the two-state solution while opposing any actions that might actually move us in that direction. But the good news is that there are those, led by the members of Congress who are standing behind me today and the other co-sponsors, who are willing to speak up and take meaningful action. And this bill does just that. These leaders and this bill are like the difference between previous Israeli leaders saying, "We want peace," and Yitzhak Rabin deciding to do something about it. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person standing up here today who actually served in the Israeli military. And I can tell you unequivocally, Israel does indeed face an existential threat to its existence. And that threat, as Andy just said, is 54 years of occupation. The occupation is what threatens Israel's democracy. And the occupation is what threatens the notion of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. Israeli and Palestinian alike deserve peace. They deserve a better future for their children. And they each deserve to see their national aspirations fulfilled. I remember when Prime Minister Rabin and Chairman Arafat stood with President Clinton and shook hands on the White House lawn. And I know that, sadly, we're not about to have another such moment. But if we want to hold on to that possibility, if we are committed to building the movement for peace and to bringing a two-state solution to fruition, then we must act today. I'm thankful that Representative Levin and his colleagues have done so, and I'm honored to stand with them here today. Thank you.
Terrific. All right, before I open it up to questions, I want to recognize one more person. We're the members of Congress and we stand before the cameras. But after the latest Israel-Gaza war, I said, we can't just worry about humanitarian assistance to Gaza or reconstruction with Gaza. We have to take on the fundamental question of long-term security and peace for Israel and for Palestinians and, create this two-state solution act. There's one person who's worked on this more than any of us and anybody else, and her name is Catherine Rowland, my Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director. Kat, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Anybody have any questions for any of us?
Who's voting how on the Iron Dome legislation this afternoon?
Who's voting how? You mean amongst the people here?
Yeah, and
I am voting for it. I don't know if I'm going to put anybody else on the spot.
I'm happy to say I'll be voting for it. I think what this bill that we're talking about calls for is the legitimate use of our support for the security of Israel, and that's what Iron Dome does. And it's time for a new chapter and a new approach where we're making sure that this defensive equipment is used in furtherance of peace.
I'm going to vote for it, and I associate myself with my colleagues' remarks on why.
I'm going to vote for it also.
There you go.
We support and we associate ourselves with the remarks of the gentlewoman from California.
Okay, the other
As I said.
question, you talked about having a substantial number of Jewish co-sponsors on this bill, and the Iron Dome legislation was pushed forward entirely by Jewish Democrats. But none of them are here, none of you are in that group. Is there a possibility that those two groups have a commonality, that they can come together?
Well, whether Jewish members or non-Jewish members, there's a just tremendous support for a two-state solution. We're here today to say we need to take action, and I believe that this bill, this moment, represents a new center of gravity in Congress, certainly in the Democratic caucus. I think the Republican Party has a long history. Republican presidents from Eisenhower, both Bushes, have supported a two-state solution. The Republican Party has sort of gone off the rails for the moment. As a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee who works bipartisan on so many things, I hope we get them back on there, back into the fold on this. But this is the new center of gravity of actually doing something to bring long-term peace and stability for Israel and fulfill Palestinian political and human rights. And we'll just grow and grow the support. Who else had a question? Yes.
Prime Minister Bennett has ruled out establishing a Palestinian state worldwide. The Biden administration says the short-term goal right now is humanitarian aid, making improvement in life of Palestinians, and two states is a way long-term goal. What makes you think that there's an opportunity today?
So, and I'm happy to welcome if anybody else wants to answer, but I'll say to this is that that first of all, history doesn't work in a gradual straight line where, every day you get a little closer to something. It's disjunctive. Things happen that open new possibilities that the day before people didn't even consider. And you've got to put in the work to take advantage of those moments. You've got to lay the groundwork so when something changes dramatically, real, permanent efforts to improve people's lives are possible. And today we are saying we are putting in the work. The fragility of the everything but the kitchen sink government in Israel, or the fact that a gentleman who represents 6 whole members of the Knesset isn't for and never has been for a two-state solution, or the fact that the Palestinian Authority doesn't have a lot of legitimacy amongst the Palestinian people, or the fact that Gaza is ruled by a terrorist organization. You can come up with a lot of excuses. What's been missing is the U.S. playing its role, its muscular, robust role of saying to these two peoples, we are going to support you and bring you together through thick and thin so that we can achieve lasting peace. And we are bound and determined that the U.S. needs to step up and play that role right now. And we look forward to working with the Biden administration toward that end. Anyone else want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I would just like to add one thing, and I agree completely with what Andy said. But I think it's really important to know that we are speaking for the American public. The American public wants a two-state solution. The leadership may feel like it may not now fit into what the agenda is and the timing, but that's not what the American public is saying. They are asking for a two-state solution.
Good point.
Let me just say too.
Speak in the mics and for those.
Yeah, I've been in Congress now for 22 years, and I have actually seen a sea change in the attitude toward creating peace in the region. There is a national movement for justice for all in our country, reflecting itself in many different ways. And I think that now, certainly the voice of the majority of American Jews has come out that we want to see security for the state of Israel. We want to see a Jewish democratic state. But that has become impossible in the face of the occupation, and that justice for Palestinians has to be part of what we are asking for in order to achieve these goals. So I think that we can not only count on the majority of Jewish Americans, but most Americans now, who after the cycle after cycle after cycle of violence, that there is a chance to end it and to mobilize Americans to support this legislation.
Well, I appreciate you asking this question because I think it's a question that gets asked a lot. Are we going to make peace today? Is there going to be a two-state solution today? And I think sometimes we get caught in this binary of two-state solution right now, yes or no. But as I mentioned, I have a master's degree in international conflict resolution. I've been working on these issues for a long time. And when you look across conflicts that have been solved, it's not that there is peace right now. It's, are we creating the conditions that are making peace conducive? Are we, just as for the last 4 years, we saw steps further and further away, are we now able to take those steps that bring us further and further together? And so it's not a question of, will we make peace right now? No, you're right. As Andy said, as you said, there are a lot of structural problems that mean that probably right in this moment, there's not going to be a negotiation. But that doesn't mean that then we should do nothing or we should lose hope. What we should be doing is doing everything we can to move us closer so that we can get to a place where negotiations are possible.
Yeah. Okay, who else? Other questions?
Okay.
You all set? Well, thank you all so much for coming out. I'm going to go put this bill in when we first start voting, so I'm excited. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Good job. Good job.
Right.